National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. will soon be heading home. A federal judge ruled yesterday that the Trump administration must end its months-long deployment in the nation's capital.
You may remember soon after those troops were deployed, D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwab sued to challenge it. Dozens of states took sides in that lawsuit, with their support falling on party lines. But yesterday, District Judge Gia Cobb, a Biden appointee, handed down her decision. She ruled that the takeover illegally intrudes on local official authority to direct law enforcement, and that while the president does have the authority to protect federal property and functions, he can't unilaterally deploy the National Guard as he sees fit or call in troops from other states. Her ruling called for the troops to be sent home, writing, quote, "Normalizing the use of military troops for domestic law enforcement sets a dangerous precedent where the president can disregard states' independence and deploy troops wherever and whenever he wants with no check on his military power."
Guard troops won't be sent home just yet. Cobb did put her order on hold for 21 days to allow for appeal. As for the White House, they're standing by the deployment. Spokeswoman told the AP, quote, "President Trump is well within his lawful authority to deploy the National Guard in Washington, D.C. to protect federal assets and assist law enforcement with specific tasks. This lawsuit is nothing more than another attempt at the detriment of D.C. residents to undermine the president's highly successful operations to stop violent crime in D.C." I would imagine they're appealing this. I mean, no shot that they don't, right?
I mean, I guess my biggest question is because the conflict for me was never that I wanted, as a new resident of D.C., for the streets to be safer. Granted, that's great. But the conflict is, how long does the National Guard stay in a place that's a Band-Aid on a situation? Like, what is the long-term solution to work alongside local officials? Because you and I have talked about this at length, to say that you think things need to change, but where I'm not hearing the conversations that the president is having directly with Mayor Bowser about what the next steps are to hold this long term for the next 3 years without keeping federal troops here that, you know, hopefully we have no emergencies under President Trump, but, you know, things like a Hurricane Katrina or anything that we would need National Guard for, that's what their roles are. And so you don't want to scramble and pull them together when they've been working nonstop in D.C. or wherever they could be somewhere else, because other places have complained about resources to do some of the office work that's required for National Guard members is not able to get accomplished, or the day-to-day stuff that doesn't look like boots on the ground on the street is not able to get accomplished because they're making sure that they have resources where the president wants them. So what's the long-term solution look like to keep the streets of D.C. safe once the National Guard go? Because obviously crime is going to go down if military personnel are standing all over the street. So now what?
There's a few things that Mayor Bowser can do. I mean, one of them is to start filling the they have a massive issue with the police force, right, where they don't have enough people. And so if she's able to fill those gaps, that would be one way to make sure that there's enough resources in the city to keep crime down. She offered bonuses a while ago, but I think this is more of a cultural issue where people don't really feel like they want to work as police in D.C. because they don't feel like they're protected. In fact, I worked on a story with my colleague at the Daily Caller a couple of months ago where we talked to individuals who have worked with the police department in D.C., and they said that there was basically a systemic effort to misreport crimes or not bring charges against individuals because they wanted to have the appearance of crime being low, even if it actually wasn't. One of the things that's unique about the Metropolitan Police Department is that in most police departments, according to people we talk to, when an officer is on scene for an arrest, they are typically the one who decides what charges are brought against a suspect. But in D.C., they have to call a supervisor to charge anyone with a violent crime. And so from that 2023 period where we saw violent crime start to fall in D.C., they said was the exact same time that they saw these policy changes taking place that discouraged them from actually charging violent crimes. They created 2 new crime categories to pull numbers away from things like robbery and assault into categories that were not classified as violent crime, things that were technically lower charges. So for example, if a teenager came up and bopped you on the head and you dropped your phone and they picked up your phone and ran away, they no longer classify that as a robbery because the assault and the theft of the phone were 2 separate incidences. So that doesn't get charged as a violent crime, even though it obviously is. So just defying the laws of common sense. So fixing a lot of those issues should be a priority for Mayor Bowser. She also needs to get Attorney General Brian Schwab in check. He's in charge of prosecuting juvenile cases in D.C. and has routinely let out people who are repeat offenders and refused to charge them. And it's no wonder that in D.C. we see that a lot of the crime problem, particularly with things like carjackings and robberies, is being driven by youth offenders.
And I think what needs to be clear, because a lot of the friction that you see coming from anybody who's resisting the president and his suggestions, even as recent as this week, he said with the leader of FIFA in town that he would like cities like Los Angeles, like Seattle, and like Boston to cooperate with him on a National Guard level so that we can present the best crime-free cities to the world as they come here for FIFA next year. And then he threatened pulling or changing the locations of these FIFA games if they don't, which I think is also absurd. But saying those two things together is that we always hear loud noise in conversation about the threats or the unlawfulness of skipping over what a mayor or a governor may or may not want in order to achieve President Trump's goals. But what we lack and what we don't hear is the president laying out a clear agenda or having a meeting like he's having today with Mamdani and Mayor Bowser that opens the door for this transparent, or as he likes to refer to himself, transparent president, telling us what he wants to see Mayor Bowser do and then letting her respond to say straight up no or yes. Because I haven't heard her say that she won't do anything or will make any changes since the National Guard comes in. I've heard she's been very amenable. She said now that the time line has ended, she told him that she thinks that the National Guard should leave because there was an agreed upon time, and now they've gone past that. And now we have courts involved. But I think that what would behoove us all, if this great experiment of trying the National Guard in D.C., which is an anomaly, it's not like any other state that would require much more to send National Guards for local crime problems, it would be to be transparent and to say what you're looking for, because you named detailed agenda about what you'd like to happen, but we haven't seen the president who implemented this strategy sit down with Mayor Bowser and say, okay, so what'd she say about that? Is she going to do it? What's the next steps? Like, what are the next steps? And that's what I think, if they're not laid out for us, then we're all kind of sitting back. Like, if it goes back to normal, then we're like, what was the coordination? Because deep coordination needs to happen between local and federal officials in order to make this work forever. And if this is supposed to be a lasting solution to America's crime problem, especially when we're looking at D.C., which is the nation's capital, that will be the mirror for the rest of the country where the president is suggesting this, show us an example of how you can work in a bipartisan nature to make this long-term and effective. And that's what I think is the biggest thing that we're missing from his entire agenda about fighting crime in the U.S.
Yeah, they certainly have been meeting, him and Bowser, and talking pretty regularly, but I think it's fair to say that they haven't publicly said what the results of those meetings are, but clearly they are happening. They're trying to coordinate something. Bowser did a press conference shortly after the National Guard came in and admitted that the crime numbers had gone down and that she was grateful for the president's cooperation, but she didn't provide details on what she was planning on doing next. So I would like to see that too.
And I think that's the thing. Like, it's like keeping us in the group chat. The president put us in the group chat when he was announcing this, and then we saw the National Guard here, and we were all like, not all. Some people were excited, some people were alarmed. There were lots of feelings that were very public. But the conversations on long-term solution and how this will affect D.C. in the long run can't be private. If we started off from a place that wasn't like a calm meeting with Bowser and Trump saying, here's our plan for the future, that looked normal and calm, we started off with almost like a threat with Bowser saying that she kind of opposed it on like places like the Breakfast Club, but then not really giving Trump too much friction. And when she was face to face with him and then doing that press conference where she's like, well, this is actually working. We're getting confused as the public, who was just, it was thrown on people who live in DC, but then also the rest of the country, and then not continue to be communicated with about what the long-term strategy is here. I think that's the biggest issue for people with the National Guard, or even with a totally separate issue with ICE, is like, okay, so what's the long-term solution? Once we throw everybody out, then what? You know, what's the plan? Because immigrants will always come, new people, so what's the plan?
Well, they're not coming now because the border's closed.
Well, they're not coming over the border, but they're flying in. Immigrants from China are coming, immigrants from South Africa. Now we've opened the border to them. Like, people are coming every day. They don't look like the typical Latin American immigrants that the president is trying to paint this picture with, but immigrants come and overstay their visas every single day.
Well, yeah, but they're being deported. And also, I mean, we have net negative migration for the first time in decades in the U.S.
But this is because we closed the border and did things that could have been bipartisan in nature when the president stopped the bill that was pushed through
That wasn't a border security bill.
That was a border security. It was a bipartisan.
Bill.
It was a bipartisan border bill. That's what I'm saying. They're working on.
James Langford was involved in the negotiations so that the Democrats could call it bipartisan, but it was a.
So you're saying that it wasn't bipartisan, even though several people from the Republican side were saying that they agreed with this moving forward, and then the president jumped in and said, "I want to win the election, so don't vote on this," and stopped it down. And that was a step in the right direction. But he can't make Biden look good in any way, so we didn't solve it. A long-term solution would be to get in Congress and put a bill forward that tells us, again, it's the same thing with immigration. What is going to be on pen and paper that's our immigration policy moving forward, outside of the president going to cities and arresting some Americans, arresting some immigrants, all chaos? That's not a plan. So what's the actual long-term plan is what I'm saying.
My point is that it's technically bipartisan because there was a small handful of Republicans involved, but the vast majority of the caucus did not agree with it. They wanted H.R. 2, which was an actual border security bill. The Democrats rejected it. The bill that you're talking about was a bill to basically ensure that illegal immigrants could be processed faster and released into the country faster, which is not a real border security solution, right?
And I don't think what we're doing now is a real border security solution either. It's just putting a Band-Aid on a problem that won't be long-term.
Oh, okay. All right.
A new report from the Wall Street Journal is highlighting the debate around the pros and cons of giving ADHD medication to children. Stay with us for that.